San Francisco in the mid-1970s was a city of contradictions. It was a beacon, a place of liberation for gay men and women from all over the country. They came seeking acceptance, a community where they could be themselves without fear. The Castro was blooming into the world's most famous gay neighborhood. The air was full of promise. But a shadow fell over that promise. A new kind of fear began to spread through the city's gay bars and late-night cafes. Men were disappearing. Men were being found dead. Someone was hunting them. They called him the Doodler. The name sounds almost playful, like a harmless habit. It's a deeply unsettling name for a serial killer. He got the name because of what he did before he killed. He was an artist, or at least he pretended to be. He would sit in bars, places like the Stud or the Ramrod, and sketch people. He'd approach a man, show him a drawing, and strike up a conversation. He was described as young, probably in his early 20s, slender, and unassuming. He wasn't threatening, he was charming. He'd offer to draw his new acquaintance, a casual, flattering gesture. It was his way in. He used art as a lure, a way to disarm his victims. After the small talk and the sketching, he'd suggest they go somewhere more private. A walk on the beach, a trip back to the man's apartment. The men who went with him never came home. The killing started in January 1974. The first known victim was Gerald Kavanaugh. He was 49 years old, a Canadian immigrant who worked at a mattress factory. He was found on Ocean Beach, lying face down near the water's edge. He had been stabbed repeatedly. He was a quiet man, not someone who made enemies. The police had few leads. At the time, it was seen as a tragic but isolated incident. A robbery gone wrong, perhaps. The city moved on. But it wasn't an isolated incident. 5 months later, in June 1974, the body of Joseph Stevens was found. People knew him as Jay. He was a popular figure in the community, a comedian and a female impersonator who performed at a club called the Gilded Cage. He was found in Spreckles Lake in Golden Gate Park. Like Kavanaugh, he had been stabbed multiple times. The community was shaken. Jay was well-liked, a vibrant personality. His death felt personal. People started talking. They wondered if the two murders were connected. The fear grew in July when a third body was discovered. Klaus Christmann, a German tourist, was found near Ocean Beach, not far from where Gerald Kavanaugh's body had been left. He was married and had children back home in Germany. The police later learned he was leading a double life, exploring San Francisco's gay scene while on vacation. He was also stabbed to death. The pattern was becoming terrifyingly clear. Someone was targeting gay men, meeting them in the city's nightlife spots, and leading them to their deaths in secluded areas. The police investigation was hampered from the start by the deep-seated mistrust between the San Francisco Police Department and the gay community. In the 1970s, homophobia was not just a social attitude, it was institutional. Police raids on gay bars were common, harassment was a constant reality, gay men were often treated as criminals, not as citizens who needed protection. So, when a killer started preying on them, many were reluctant to talk to the police. They feared being outed, being judged, or even being blamed. The victims themselves were often dismissed. Their murders were sometimes written off as part of a high-risk lifestyle, a grim and unfair judgment that placed the blame on the men who were killed instead of on the person who killed them. The SPD did investigate, of course. Detectives Harvey Milk and Rotea Guilford were assigned to the case. Milk, who would later become the city's first openly gay elected official, was a community liaison at the time, a bridge between the police and the people they were supposed to serve. But even with their efforts, progress was slow. The crime scenes offered few clues. There was no DNA technology back then. The killer was careful, he left behind bodies, but not much. The break in the case came not from forensics, but from survivors. The Doodler didn't succeed every time. At least 3 men managed to escape his attacks. They went to the police and told their stories. Their accounts were chillingly similar. They had met a young man in a gay bar or a diner. He was an artist who drew cartoons and sketches. He was charming, and they felt comfortable with him. They left with him, and then he attacked them, brandishing a knife. These men fought back and got away. Their survival was a miracle, and they did something incredibly brave. They gave the police a description of their attacker. From their testimony, police artists created a composite sketch. It showed a young black man with a narrow face, a wide nose, and a relaxed expression. The police now had a face to attach to the Doodler. They circulated the sketch. They finally had a solid lead. The survivor's bravery went even further. They identified a suspect. The police brought in a young man who fit the description. They put him in a lineup, and the survivors pointed him out. This was him. This was the Doodler. The police had their man. They questioned him. He was a student, an aspiring artist. He fit the profile perfectly. For a moment, it seemed like the case was about to be solved. The man was arrested. The city could breathe a sigh of relief. But then the case fell apart. It collapsed under the weight of the era's prejudice. To charge the suspect, the district attorney needed the survivors to testify against him in open court, and that's where everything stopped. The 3 survivors were all closeted. They were living in a world where being publicly identified as gay could mean losing everything. One of the men was a well-known entertainer, another was a foreign diplomat. A public testimony would have destroyed their careers, alienated their families, and made them targets of hate and ridicule. The risk was too great. They were caught in an impossible trap. They could bring a killer to justice, but it would mean the destruction of their own lives. They had survived a knife attack only to be faced with a different kind of threat from the very system that was supposed to protect them. They refused to testify. They chose to remain in the shadows to protect themselves. It's hard to blame them. Their decision was a direct result of the society they lived in. Without their public testimony, the district attorney's hands were tied. There wasn't enough physical evidence to build a case. The suspect had been identified, but without a witness willing to take the stand, there was no path to a conviction. The police had to let him go. The man who was almost certainly the Doodler walked free. He was never charged with the murders, and the killing continued. The police believe the Doodler struck at least twice more. In May 1975, a 32-year-old man named Frederick Capin was found dead in a vacant lot. He worked as a nurse and had served as a medic in Vietnam. His body was found by a man walking his dog. He had been stabbed, just like the others. A month later, in June 1975, the body of Harold Goldberg was discovered in Lincoln Park. Goldberg was 66 years old, a Swedish sailor who was visiting the city. He had been dead for about 2 weeks when his body was found. His pants were unzipped and he had defensive wounds on his hands. He was the Doodler's 5th and final confirmed victim. There may have been more. Police have long suspected the Doodler was responsible for the deaths of 2 other unidentified men whose bodies were found in the Sutro Baths area around the same time. The total number of victims could be as high as 16, though the official count remains 5, with one known survivor of a brutal assault. After the death of Harold Goldberg in June 1975, the murders simply stopped. No more bodies were found that fit the Doodler's pattern. The killer vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. The case went cold. For decades, the Doodler became a ghost story, a dark chapter in San Francisco's history that was largely forgotten by the outside world. The Zodiac Killer, who had terrorized the Bay Area a few years earlier, captured the public imagination with his cryptic letters and ciphers. The Doodler, whose crimes were just as brutal, faded from the headlines. His victims were gay men in an era when their lives were not valued equally. Their stories were not told with the same urgency. The case files gathered dust. The suspect went on with his life. The survivors lived with what they knew and what they couldn't say. For over 40 years, there was silence, but the story never completely went away. In the gay community, it was a cautionary tale, a reminder of a time when danger lurked behind a charming smile. Then, in the 2010s, a new wave of interest in cold cases, fueled by podcasts and new forensic technology, brought the Doodler back into the light. A major catalyst was the work of Kevin Fagan, a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle. He began digging into the old case files, interviewing retired detectives, and trying to piece together the story that had been left untold for so long. His reporting, which culminated in a podcast called The Doodler, brought the case to a new generation. It shone a light not just on the murders, but on the social context that allowed the killer to get away. Fagan's work emphasized the humanity of the victims, telling their stories and giving them back the dignity that had been denied to them. The renewed attention had a real-world impact. In 2018, the San Francisco Police Department officially reopened the Doodler case. They announced a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the killer. They also released a new sketch of the suspect. This one was different. It was an age-progressed image, showing what the Doodler might look like today in his late 60s or early 70s. The police hoped that someone somewhere might recognize the face and finally come forward with the missing piece of the puzzle. The police also acknowledged the failures of the past. In a press conference, SFPD Commander Greg McEachern spoke directly about the historical context of the case. He admitted that the relationship between the police and the gay community in the 1970s was not one of trust. He expressed hope that in today's world, witnesses would feel more comfortable coming forward. It was a subtle but significant admission of the institutional homophobia that had crippled the original investigation. Later, in 2019, SFPD Chief William Scott went even further. He issued a formal historic apology to the city's LGBTQ community for the decades of police harassment and discrimination. While he didn't mention the Doodler case by name, the apology was a powerful acknowledgement of the history that allowed a killer like him to operate and then disappear. It was a recognition that the failure to solve the case was not just a failure of police work, but a failure of the city to protect all of its citizens equally. The investigation today is focused on modern science. The police have been re-examining evidence from the original crime scenes, hoping to find DNA that could be used to identify the killer. In the age of genetic genealogy, where killers from the same era, like the Golden State Killer, have been identified through distant relatives who submitted their DNA to ancestry websites, there is a renewed sense of hope. A single speck of biological material from a crime scene could be enough to finally give the Doodler a name. The main suspect, the man who was identified by the survivors back in the 1970s, is still alive. He is living in the Bay Area. He has been interviewed by reporters and by the police again in recent years. He has consistently denied any involvement in the murders. He lives a quiet life. Without new evidence, like a DNA match, he remains a free man, a person of interest in a decades-old string of murders, but not a convicted killer. The law requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and the Doodler case has always been just short of that proof. The story of the Doodler is more than just a true crime narrative. It's a story about a specific time and place. It's about the collision of liberation and violence. San Francisco in the 1970s was a city where gay men could find freedom, but that very freedom made them vulnerable. The bars and clubs that were sanctuaries were also hunting grounds. The openness and trust that defined the community were exploited by a predator who used intimacy as a weapon. The case is also a powerful indictment of institutional prejudice. The failure to solve the Doodler murders is a direct consequence of the systemic homophobia of the time. The police department's indifference, the fear that kept witnesses silent, the media's lack of sustained interest, all of it stemmed from the fact that the victims belonged to a marginalized community. Their lives were considered less important. If the victims had been wealthy, straight socialites from Pacific Heights, the investigation would have been relentless. But they were gay men, and their killer was allowed to slip away. Today, the search for the Doodler continues, but it's a race against time. The killer, if he is still alive, would be an old man. The witnesses and investigators are aging as well. Memories fade, people die, the trail that went cold almost 50 years ago becomes harder to follow with each passing day. But the effort to solve the case is about more than just closing a file. It's about justice for Gerald Kavanaugh, Jay Stevens, Klaus Christman, Frederick Capon, and Harold Goldberg. It's about giving them their names back and telling their stories. It's about acknowledging the pain of a community that was terrorized and then ignored. Who was the Doodler? He was a young man with a sketch pad and a knife. He was a predator who used art and charm to get close to his victims. He was a ghost who haunted the city's gay community and then vanished. But he was also a symbol. He was a symbol of the violence that can flourish in the shadows of prejudice. His crimes expose the terrible cost of a society that devalues the lives of some of its own people. The search for him is not just about finding a killer. It's about confronting a painful past and honoring the men whose lives he stole. The case remains open. The Doodler's identity remains one of San Francisco's darkest and most enduring mysteries.